At the end of the day, most people are good. Most people want to show up at their work and do a good job. And so we as leaders have to figure out how to channel that. Now, one of the things that tends to happen though, Monique, if we're being completely honest, is there's so much conversation about diverse groups, right? And diversity and things like that. But what we don't talk about is how sometimes leading diverse groups, and diverse meaning people who think differently, act differently, look differently, have different, communication styles, different upbringings and experiences. So I mean diversity in all of its aspects, right? What we don't talk about is sometimes how it's hard to lead diverse teams. So there's no question diverse teams outperform teams that are traditional, right? But the question then becomes, as leaders, how do you level up your game so that you're able to lead all these different thoughts and perspectives? Because that's what you want. You want all the differences, but you too have to be a leader who can handle all the differences and knows how to facilitate the different ways that conversations may take place, because people don't have the same experience, background, upbringing, and cultural fluency.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. I am your host, Monique T. Marshall, and as always, I am so happy that you are here because today we are getting real about how to lead people who don't think or look like you. As you know, leadership isn't just about making decisions and calling the shots. It's about knowing how to guide a team, earn respect, and create a culture where people actually want to show up and do their best work. But let's be honest, leading a team isn't always straightforward, especially when the people you're leading don't think like you, look like you, or share your same experiences. As a Black entrepreneur, you already know what it's like to navigate spaces where you feel like the only one. Now, as a leader, you're managing people from different backgrounds, perspectives, and generations while still trying to make sure your voice is heard. And let's talk about this whole ally conversation. What does it really mean to be an ally in business? Too often we see performative gestures with no real action behind them. So, how do you build a team that's actually inclusive? How do you lead people who are different from you without losing yourself in the process? That's why today we're sitting down with Stephanie Chung. She's not just a powerhouse in leadership. She's the first Black woman to run a private aviation company, a former Fortune 100 executive, and an expert in ally leadership. She spent 30 plus years leading high-performing teams and coaching top executives on how to create workspaces where diverse teams win. In today's conversation, she's sharing what it takes to lead people who don't think or look like you and how to step into your role as a true, effective leader. We're breaking down how to overcome biases that might be holding you back, the difference between performative and real allyship, and the practical steps you can take right now to become the kind of leader that people trust and respect. So if you are ready to level up your leadership and build a stronger, more connected team, this is the conversation for you. So let's get into it. Stephanie, welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. We are so excited to have you on the show, so welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun, Monique. Fun.
Yes, I can feel it. I can feel it too. So I'm excited. One, because you're here, and then two, also because this conversation that we're having today is something that we have not discussed on the Black to Business Podcast. And we're getting into the real of how to lead people who don't think or look like you. Before we dive into the discussion, I would love it if you could share a little bit about your background. What is it that you do in your business, and how did you get here?
Sure. So my background, again, thanks for having me. My background is I spent 40 years in aviation, right? So the first half of my career, I started off in the airlines. And then the second half of my career, I got recruited into private aviation. So first, let me start at the very beginning. My dad was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. So I was that kid that grew up on active Air Force bases. I moved around every 2 years of my life, and I absolutely loved that lifestyle. And so, what that did, Monique, is it helped me understand what I wanted to do. So I was the little girl that knew I wanted to be in aviation since I was a child, right? So my very first job in aviation, I started parking planes, loading luggage at the Boston Logan Airport. And why that was important is when I was growing up, and though I knew I wanted to be in aviation, the truth of the matter is back then, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, whenever you would see aviators depicted in TV, film, magazines, or anywhere really, you would always see if you were a man, you were a pilot. And if you were a woman, you were a flight attendant. Right. So those are the two images that I saw. However, none of those pictures ever looked like me or you, right? And so what that did is even though I knew what I wanted to do, I didn't know what was accessible for me to do because I'd never seen a person of color depicted as a person in aviation. So very first job, as I mentioned, parking planes, loading luggage at the Boston Logan Airport. And that was my entry into all things, airline aviation related. Yes. Absolutely loved the job. I would go upstairs and work at the ticket counter, checking people in for their flights as for overtime because I was broke, right? And so I would always look for ways to make more money. And when I was up there, one of our VPs, because the airline that I worked for at the time had a really huge presence in the city of Boston. So I would always see the executives flying in and out of the city. And so I knew who they were because they were the executives, but I didn't think that they knew who I was. And one day when I was at the ticket counter checking customers in, one of the VPs of sales, his name was Jim, he came over to me and he said to me, Steph, every time I come to this airport, I see you. I see you checking customers in with a smile on your face. I think we have you in the wrong position. I think you should be in sales. So I didn't know anything about sales. Fast forward, I ended up getting promoted, selling for the airlines. I was 25 years old when I got promoted. They gave me a quota of $25 million and I crushed it. And then from there, got more promotions throughout in the airline side. Then I got recruited into private aviation. And that was something really unique for me because I grew up a military kid. I didn't grow up around private jets and that level of wealth, and so I just didn't know anything about that industry. But I went ahead and stepped out on faith, took a chance, and absolutely loved it. So sold in the private aviation industry, then got promoted, became the first Black person in U.S. history to run a private aviation company. Absolutely loved that. And then was recruited into another company that was bigger, and that allowed me to be an officer of a publicly held company. Absolutely loved that as well. And now what I do is I really speak, for a living. That is my primary source of income. I speak for a living primarily to Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, to their leadership teams or sales teams or their female executive teams. And I speak on three subjects: leadership, sales, or female empowerment. So that's one part of what I do. I know that I'm here to talk about the book. So I am an author of a #1 international best-selling book called Ally Leadership, How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. And I know that we'll do a deep dive into that. And then I'm also on some boards and whatnot. So that's a little bit of history about who I am from a career perspective. And then the most important stuff, honestly, Monique, is I'm married to the same guy, Sam Chung, for 35 years. We have a daughter, Brittany, and Brittany just got engaged over the Christmas holiday. So life is good. I'm in the middle of wedding planning stuff.
Good. That is amazing. That is so beautiful. What a phenomenal story. And just I love the energy and all the great things, and such a go-getter and also inspiring. So as you mentioned, you're an author. So we are talking about the foundations of Ally Leadership. So before we get into that, let's talk about first, what is Ally Leadership, Stephanie, and why is it so important in today's workforce?
That is so good. So first, let me tell you what Ally stands for, because when I was writing the book, I could have called it allyship, but I specifically did not want to call it that because the book itself, Ally Leadership, Ally is an acronym, Monique. And so it stands for ask, listen, learn, and then you take action. So that's what Ally stands for. And the reason why I wrote the book is really twofold. One, let's think about just the workforce of what we're dealing with today. Today's modern workforce has 6, generations working within it, which is unheard of. So the
Mm-hmm.
intergenerational part of it is a interesting aspect, meaning you've got, boomers who don't think anything like a Zoomer, right? Gen Z, or
Mm-hmm.
millennials who don't think like Gen X. And so there's just a lot of different ideas, perspectives, expectations as far as the different generations are concerned. So that's the first part of the modern workforce. The second part is that we've got women who are the majority of the world's population for sure, but definitely in our country, women are the majority of the population. So that changes the workforce because we think differently, communicate differently, see things differently. Then there's a third part of it, which is in our country, the ethnic demographic shifts, right? So the Black, Asian, Hispanic race are all growing. All the ethnic races are growing, non-ethnic race shrinking. So that changes the dynamics. And then that's not even to mention people with different abilities or different neurodiversities or, the LGBTQ plus community. There's just a lot going on in today's modern workforce. And really what that means is leaders are leading people who are not like each other, and they're also not like the leader, right? And so that was
Mm-hmm.
one of the main reasons why I wrote the book. The second reason why I wrote the book is I felt like all the different material that was out there was really geared towards white men. And so most of the, books or conversation was really towards, teaching white men how to lead women or people of color. And though that's important because white men still, for the most part, have a majority of the leadership positions, I felt like the conversation needed to go deeper and wider. It's not, that's one piece of the conversation, but another piece of the conversation is how do we, all of us, every leader today is going to be leading people who are not like them. So how do you do it? And that's really what this book is, because I come from a white male dominated industry, and yet I've been able to reach the highest level. And so I wrote the book as a tool to help other people hopefully be able to do it easier and faster and better than I did. Right. And then I would just add this third piece to it, which is a part of me was also getting really tired of hearing people self-anoint themselves as an ally. Right. Because,
Mm.
and don't even get me started with that whole thing. But, it's
Yeah.
when you can't just call yourself an ally, because what tends to happen is when I'm out there speaking, a lot of times, Monique, people will come up to me afterwards and say, absolutely love this stuff. I'm all on board. I love it. I'm an ally to women, let's say. And they'll say, I'm married to the same women. I've got, 4 daughters, and I'm an ally to women. And then my response is always, that's great. I love that. Thank you so much. Tell me what you've done this week to show your
Yes.
allyship. And you know what, Monique? I get crickets, right? People stand there looking
Mm-hmm.
at me cross-eyed because they don't have any receipts to back up this statement. And so, listen, in today's society with so much going on in the world, everybody's BS monitor is on high alert. And so what we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to hear is to have somebody say, I'm an ally, in whatever shape, form that is. You can't just say it. You have to be able to back it up with actual action you've taken. And the truth of the matter is, if you back it up with action you've taken, you don't have to tell us you're an ally. We can see it for ourselves.
That's a whole word. That is a perfect explanation, because I'm so glad that you tackled that first. Because my whole thing, I know people are asking, well, do we have any allies, and what does an ally really look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm glad that we broke that down. And then also, one of the things that I like that you mentioned is the fact that understanding and leading people who aren't like you is an everyone issue, as you described it. So why do
Yes.
you say this?
Yes, yes. Well, because for all the reasons that I mentioned in the sense of the today's modern workforce, right? Every leader that wants to be relevant has got to know how to lead all God's children, every race, every creed, every gender. That's the job, right? And so if you don't know how to do it, aren't willing to do it, want to kind of keep doing things your way, no problem. It's just you'll be left behind, right? You'll be irrelevant, and, God help you, right? Because it
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't work that way. And so my whole purpose of writing the book is I really, really want to help leaders, entrepreneurs, everybody, just to understand that this isn't an option that you have. Everything is changing. And so you can either get on board or get off, get off board, right? So just get out the way then,
Mm-hmm.
because at the end of the day, most people are good. Most people want to show up at their work and do a good job. And so we as leaders have to figure out how to channel that. Now, one of the things that tends to happen though, Monique, if we're being completely honest, is there's so much conversation about diverse groups, right? And diversity and things like that. But what we don't talk about is how sometimes leading diverse groups, and diverse meaning people who think differently, act differently, look differently, have different, communication styles, different upbringings and experiences. So I mean diversity in all of its aspects, right?
Yes.
What we don't talk about is sometimes how it's hard to lead diverse teams. So there's no question diverse teams outperform teams that are traditional, right? But the question then becomes, as leaders, how do you level up your game so that you're able to lead all these different thoughts and perspectives? Because that's what you want. You want all the differences, but you too have to be a leader who can handle all the differences and knows how to facilitate the different ways that conversations may take place, because people don't have the same experience, background, upbringing, and cultural fluency.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because my next question is actually, what are some of the techniques that leaders can use to turn differences into strengths?
Like that. So what I would say is, first, lean into it. Half of the battle is leaning into the uncomfortable conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times what happens is people would rather not have the uncomfortable conversation. And so then this whole thing becomes moot, right? So you have to get, as a leader, you must be really comfortable with and incredibly self-aware of how to have uncomfortable conversations. That will be your competitive advantage, if you will. Now, I know that a lot of your audience are Black entrepreneurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I would say is, and I joke about this all the time, especially Black females, our superpower is having uncomfortable conversations, right?
Yes.
Like that is our superpower. And so, that, lean into that. Don't shy away from it, or because it makes other people uncomfortable, choose not to do it. What society is desperate for is truth. That's really what, when I think of uncomfortable conversations, is everybody speaking their truth. So how do you do it as a leader? Well, you first have to lean into it and not run away from it, because you will lead your team. Your job is to lead by example, right? I also like to set up the team so that we have those opportunities to have the uncomfortable conversation. And so what I mean by that is, one of the best CEOs I ever had, I always say, he would bring the whole leadership team together. He would create some kind of, I don't know, controversy, right? He would create the uncomfortable conversation by bringing
Mm-hmm.
up something that people were just felt like, ugh, they didn't want to go down that road. And then, then he would leave, right? And make us have to hash it out. So healthy confrontation, or constructive confrontation, is a good thing for a team. I would tell you the most healthiest teams actually know how to navigate uncomfortable conversations or healthy confrontation, because that is where you're going to get your best ideas. So what you don't want is everybody on the team who's just going to be yes men and yes men, yes ma'ams to the leader or to the team. And we've all had that experience, Monique, right? We've all had, I'll give you a specific example.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was on one of the leadership teams that I worked for, and I was the only woman on the team, and I was the only person of color. And so as we're having this discussion about, which direction the company should go, I felt one way. A lot of my peers, who all looked alike, thought alike, had the same background, everything, felt a different way, right? And so as I'm having the discussion with them, the discussion gets a little lively, right? Because people aren't picking up what I'm laying down. And so,
Yeah.
and so we're having that. And, listen, I am very good at being able to dig in. And so my calf muscles are getting stronger as I'm standing firm on my belief in what I think we should do as an organization to really maximize the opportunity. And so I remember at the end of the conversation, it was an intense conversation. I remember then going to the water fountain afterwards, and two of my colleagues came over to me, both men who were in the meeting, and they were like, Steph, you know what? I completely agree with you. I agree with everything you said. And I remember just stopping them and saying, save it. I don't want to hear that. Because
Mm.
when you had the opportunity, when I was, getting my butt handed to me, right? When you
Mhm.
had that
Yeah.
opportunity to chime in, step in, and say that you agree or what have you, you chose not to. So don't have that conversation with me now, because right now I don't care, right? And right now it doesn't do
Mhm.
any good. So my whole point for that is for leaders, that what you want to do is you actually want to have it. Nobody's having a discussion or disagreeing in one of the meetings that you're running or one of the companies that you're running. I want you to know that's a huge red flag. There's a problem there, right? You really want a team that is going to actually have different debates and actually not agree with each other, because that's where you get the best, right? That's where you get the best opportunity. And it's all, as long as it's all done with respect, right? That's the biggest thing, is you have to keep everybody's respect and dignity intact. But as leaders, our job is, we do want to hire for that. We want to hire for people who are different. I always say you're really hiring, let's say, a baseball team or a basketball team. If everybody on the team, let's use basketball, are forwards, right? Then the team's
Mhm.
never going to win. Like, you need
Mhm.
people who play different positions. And that's really the mission here, is as leaders, I want people to get really comfortable with pulling in people who don't think alike or have the same communication style or background or schooling or so on and so forth. When you get comfortable with that and you know how to facilitate those types of constructive conversations, that's when you can count yourself to be a leader who's actually professionally mature, right? Other than that, if you don't have that kind of capability, get the capability, because that's where the world is going. And if you think about leading people who are not like each other, you as a leader, your biggest job is to develop other leaders. That's the job of a leader. And so you can't do that if everybody's, afraid of actually saying anything that's going to counter what other people are talking about on the team. And so a lot of your professional maturity, as well as marketability, comes from you being able to have and manage and facilitate those uncomfortable conversations.
Yes, that is so good. And I'm so glad that you also shared your experience. And it brings up that, for me, it brings up the trust. Like, the leader is able to leave the room and let everybody have at it, or just being able to have certain conversations. So, Stephanie, what are some practical steps that leaders can take to start to build that trust and cohesion within a diverse team?
Yeah, so trust is so important. At the end of the day, that's the most important part in any relationship, right? All of our
Mm-hmm.
relationships that we all hold near and dear to our heart, it's because they're based on trust. And so the very first thing that you'll want to do in regards to building trust, and you're right, that executive, why I thought he was so great is he did trust us to hash it out and then
Yeah.
come to the table and, and have a solution, right? Now, that takes time to build, because trust, listen, trust actually can be built very quickly if you know how to do it. But it's not like a friendship, right? Friendships take years to develop. Trust can take literally seconds. But a big way to build trust is to do what you say, right? For starters, to be a person of your word, and also to present the pros and cons. And what I mean by that is, let's use, if you go to a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant and you say to your waitress, "Hey, listen, so is the meatloaf any good today?" And she says, "Actually, I don't think so." Right? You're
Mm-hmm.
going to be like, "Thank you." You know what I mean? And all of a
Yeah.
sudden you trust her and you've elevated her because she's speaking truth, right? She could have said, like, "Oh yeah, everything's good here." Like, I hate when people say that, right? Everything's good, right? You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Right. Me
But
too.
the fact that when she's, saying, "Actually, like, we've done, like, we got a different chef today. I don't think the meatloaf's all that great, but what I do like is," and then, give you some other presentations, right? That's something super simple, but that's a matter of trust. And speaking pros and cons, that's an example of that, because not all of our products or service, or somewhere along the line, there's certain things that are not the best of the best in every single area. There's some areas that we may fall short as far as our product, our service, or even our leadership style, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so as leaders, what we have to do is, when you're looking to build trust, you want to, one, hire, and then also set the stage. So you're hiring for character, not necessarily just capabilities. So that's important, right? Because either people have a character that's going to line up to trust, or they don't. And we all know those people, right? We're just like, you know what? I wouldn't trust this guy like 2 feet past where I can see him,
Right.
right? So don't hire that, right? But the second thing is, You hire for it, and then you also set the tone because leaders lead by example. So I'll give you an example. Every team, when I was a sales leader, a lot of times what would happen is as a sales leader, you're taking over a team primarily because the leader before you didn't get the job done, right? That's usually why they're bringing in a new sales leader. And so what I would do is the very first day, the very first meeting I would have with the team to set the stage. And the goal was how I wanted the team to function. So my pitch would go something like this. Listen, y'all, I'm glad to be here, blah, 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 blah. But let's talk about a couple of things that are really important. This is my particular leadership style. And the way that I see a team is that we are in this together. So I do expect that you would be your brother and sister's keeper, right? We're a team. So we're all going to win together or we're all going to lose together, but it's our choice. Now, the reason why I would set that stage is because I wanted them to know this is what I expect. I expect that as a team, we're going to function as a team. We got each other's back. We're going to celebrate the wins together. And if we make some, mistakes, that's okay. We're going to learn them together, right? But we're one unit. And that was really important to set the stage because then people knew like, okay. And my team also knew, you never come to me complaining about your brother and or sister, right? Like you just don't come to me complaining about somebody else on the team unless you've already gone to that teammate and you two try to hash it out. Because sometimes, listen, teams are messy, right? So sometimes you're not going to get along with people. So you two need to have that conversation. If you can't figure it out, then the two of you can come to me and the three of us can try to figure it out. But you're never allowed to come to me and complain about somebody else on the team without you first having gone to them first. And that's another form of how you build trust, right? So again, the uncomfortable conversations for me are the premise of how you build trust because it sets the tone of like, here's who I am, here's what I expect. And then the team can actually, continue to go, okay, this is how I fit into this equation. If you're a person who doesn't like uncomfortable conversations, or you're a person who doesn't, prefer to hit a confrontation head on, you're probably not going to be comfortable on my team. And because I know my style and what I'm looking for the team, I know how to hire or not hire for that, if you will.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Yes. Okay, I know this conversation is getting good and you're probably taking some mental notes. While you're at it, let me share something with you that's been super helpful for me. If you're anything like me, you juggle a lot, and sometimes staying focused can be a challenge, and that's where Magic Mind comes in. So I first tried it last year, and I have been hooked ever since. It's a mental performance shot that keeps me focused, calm, and productive without the crash or the jitters. And what I love about Magic Mind is that it supports your body's natural energy production. Unlike quick fixes, it uses ingredients like organic matcha, nootropics, and adaptogens that are backed by science to improve mental clarity and focus while reducing stress. And here's the exciting part. Magic Mind is offering their Focus Plus Sleep Bundle, which gives you the mental clarity you need during the day and helps you unwind at night. For our Black to Business family, you can grab this bundle at 45% off. Just head to magicmind.com/black2bjan. So that's /black TOB JAN to get your discount. And Stephanie, one of the things we spoke about also is the fact that you mentioned if you're not getting with the times and having a diverse team, you're going to be left behind. And so when it comes to leading people who don't think or look like you, sometimes there are hidden biases that comes up. So I want to talk about how do we identify and also overcome those biases in leadership. So how do hidden biases impact leadership, you would say, and what can entrepreneurs do to uncover their own biases?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, let me start with the last part first. First, you've just got to realize you have them. Right. So we all just have that discussion with yourself. You have, regardless of who you are, you have a bias against some, whether it's groups of people, a type of person, there's a gazillion different biases, right? So you have to realize that you have them. And now, and also the second part is biases aren't always bad. We've always painted them to be a bad thing, but sometimes they're not always a bad thing, right? Biases are created as a form of protection for our brain, as an example. And so the first thing you have to realize is, let me just get geeky for a second. The brain doesn't just naturally not like somebody. Like that's just not how it's designed, right? So there's a reason why it may not necessarily like somebody. And it could be that person reminds you of somebody that you don't like, right? It could be that person has some habits that maybe you don't like in yourself, right? There's a lot of reasons why you may not necessarily, like the person, and we're going to classify that as an unconscious bias, right? And so first we have to acknowledge that we have them. Two, we have to acknowledge that they're not all bad. But now we have to realize, well, why is it about that? What is it about that person I don't particularly care for? And you have to do some inner work and address that, right? So if it's, there's the obvious bias, which, listen, I think we would all agree, Monique, we actually like the biases. Like if you just say, you know what, I just don't like, we'll just use this as an example. I just don't like Black people. Okay. You know what I mean? I'd much rather hear that. And then you can tell me all the reasons why than the person who says, oh, no, I don't see color. All right. And I get along with everybody. And then you're like, okay, well, hold on. Right. You know what I mean? Because what happens is with that, the other one is quite clear and that's their truth. Right. So now I know how to navigate that. But when it's a different scenario and you're not speaking your truth, right now, I don't know how to navigate that. And so what I would say, and I'm going to get off this because I'm getting ready to go deeper than I want to go on this podcast. We can pull off the scab on a whole lot of issues on this subject. So I'm going to, abort, right? But what I will say is that we have to just realize that every single one of us have a bias, and it's literally there to somewhat protect us from a brain perspective, so that you're hyper aware and hypersensitive of certain things. But we also have to realize that that part of our brain that is doing that is the oldest part of our brain. So it's not always accurate. Right. It was there for when we had caveman days and, tigers were chasing us through through the forest, but it's not necessarily accurate now. And certainly we don't need to have our body go into a fight and flight mode because someone's not like us. Right. So there's ways that you have to channel that. How you channel that is going back to, and I actually talk a lot about this in the book, going back to becoming an ally. You have to ask, you have to listen, you have to learn, and then you have to take action. And that action could be, okay, I'm going to try to override my brain's default system of naturally not caring or liking this person for whatever reason. Right. That's what I mean by taking action. So I'll give you an example. There's a friend of mine that he's a great guy, right? He's a great guy. But if you look at him, he looks like he's a scary dude, right? And so one of the things when I first met him, and he's a white gentleman as well. When I first met him, my brain was like, nope, we don't got nothing in common with this guy. And not because he was white, but because he just looked like he, was a gun coat toting, carrying, flag guy, right? So, but when I got to know him, asking, listening, learning, hearing, and then what I realized is this guy and I have so much in common. We have more in common than we don't. And he's a very good friend of mine now, right? Really somebody who I have a tremendous amount of respect for and very close to. But what's an interesting dynamic is if you see us walk into a coffee shop together, the whole place will look at us like, what those two do? How are they hanging out? Because it doesn't look like we should actually be friends. And that's really sad that that's where our world has gotten to, but it is what it is. So what we can do is to make sure we don't feed into our bias. And how we do that is really getting to know the person. Everything that I thought I knew about him or his type was incorrect. And I wouldn't have known that had I not taken the time to sit there and ask questions and listen to him and learn about him and then make a decision, right? Actually take an action to override what I thought about him and actually give him the benefit of the doubt. And of course, he had to do the same for me, right? Because again, it's a mutual respect there. So that's the part that leadership, we don't talk about it a lot, but we're going to have to lean into it. If you look at the world around you, there's a couple things people that can do just on the basics as well. Do all your friends look like you? Right? Do all your friends have, how many friends do you have that don't look like you? How many friends do you have that didn't grow up in the same, country as you? How many friends do you have that, have an accent? Right? How many friends do you have that come from a different religion. I mean, you can challenge yourself. And in the book, I actually write down and list out some things that you can really like take your own tests. How many friends are not like you? And if that's the case, most of us hang out with people who are very similar to us. The first thing you can do is go to another neighborhood that's not like where you are. Every neighborhood, and we all know this, every neighborhood that has different communities, they have their community centers, they have different art galleries, they have different food that's there, they have different, cultural and heritage experiences. And so take action, right? Do things that are going to allow you to be put into a situation where people are not like you. And therefore then lean into it and learn as much as you can. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised how your world opens up.
Yes, I love that. And Stephanie, one of the things you also spoke about earlier is as a speaker, you interact with a lot of different people, and sometimes people come up to you and they're like, I'm an ally, but they haven't done the work.
Yes.
So let's talk about some strategies that you found most effective for leaders to shift from performative to authentic allyship.
Yeah. And some of the simplest things can be like one of the simplest things I would say is to really spend time with, let's say, it's somebody that you lead. You can ask them, hey, what's one personal goal that you're trying to get accomplished this year? And I would be so honored if you could tell me one thing I can do to help you achieve it. Right? That's just a simple thing you can do. And that's a form of asking, right? And then you're going to listen and you're going to learn and then you're going to take action. And so I think what happens is, and that's another reason why I wanted to write the book, Monique, because I feel like people overcomplicate this, right? Yes. And it's not that complicated, Yeah. The things that we can do are just really simple things, but it does take action. It does take us having to do those things that we would get out of the comfort zone. Take somebody to lunch or have a conversation with somebody that you're not familiar with, that you may know them. You may see them at work. You may know a little bit about them, but you don't really know them. There's nothing wrong with having coffee with them to just say, like, I'd love to hear more about your story. Right? There's in the book, I also lay out different questions that you can ask people to keep it fun and light, right? Everything doesn't have to be deep and world changing, right? Sometimes it's just, you can ask real fun questions to get to know people. But I'll give you one of my favorite questions. One of my favorite questions to ask people if I'm just trying to get to know them is like, hey, you know what? If you could travel in time, would you rather travel backwards to meet your ancestors or forward to meet your descendants? Like, I love that question.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a good question, right? Because how they answer it, it's going to tell me so much about them. And now I'm going to hear a little bit about what matters to them, right? And so again, not everything has to be like, how world, like just this big grandiose situation. It's really what we watch our kids do in kindergarten is the same thing that we should be doing now as adults. Somewhere along the line, life is, grabbed us by the throat and we've kind of lost our way, but it really isn't that complicated. If you really want to be an ally, or maybe you're not even at that place that you want to be an ally, that you just want to be a better person because you want to be able to get out of your own biases or get out of your own way because you realize the world is changing, then really look for people and opportunities that are not familiar to you in your world house. And then instead of being afraid and not talking to them, lean into it and talk to them. Because what I find is people who are not like us would much rather, because it's a head and heart issue as well, right, Monique? It's head, the logical part. I've talked about the brain, but it's also a heart issue. And so what I found is people will give you grace if they realize that you're trying to learn, right? They'd much rather you make a mistake and have the conversation or maybe say something that was stupid or you didn't mean to, not because you were trying to be hurtful, but because you truly didn't know. They'd much rather deal with that than you not talk to them at all and you not try to get to know their story at all, right? That's where things start getting amok. And so if we would just approach this like our kids would approach it with a gazillion different questions, right? Then, again, the world will open up and it won't be such a scary thing. And I say that, if you're not in leadership, you should do these things, but you don't have to. But if you're in leadership, you don't have a choice if you want to remain relevant and to be able to be that leader that people are so impressed by and want to give you promotions because they know that you know how to lead teams that are high functioning, and that most high functioning teams statistically are diverse teams. people who don't think alike, communicate alike, have the same background or experience or life experiences. Those are the best performing teams. And you as a leader, if you want a competitive advantage, you have to know how to lead and create those types of teams.
Certainly. And in those times, like how do leaders balance acknowledging that privilege without feeling defensive or even overwhelmed?
Yeah. So the first thing about privilege is we all have it, right? The word,
Mhm.
it's funny. The word privilege is a positive word, and it's turned very negative somewhere
Yeah.
along the way. But it's an incredibly positive word, and so we all do have some form of privilege. And a lot of times, what's been happening is we use the word privilege, and it kind of is classified towards one particular group, and of course, then they feel defensive because they're like, I didn't have things handed to me on a silver platter. And so then the whole conversation goes crazy, right? And it just goes off the
Mhm.
rails and nobody wins. But what I want leaders to realize is that even just you as a leader, you have a privilege. If you're an entrepreneur, you run your own business, there's a privilege, right? If you have, food on your plate, a roof over your head, we all have some type of privilege. So if we can diffuse the word, that's half the battle right there. But when you realize that you have a privilege, then what you can do is you can figure out how to use that privilege for good. And that's really important, and how you use it for good. So let's just say from a leadership perspective, let's go back to my original question. If I'm asking somebody, hey, what's one personal goal you're working towards? And I'd be, so honored if you can tell me one thing that I could do to help you achieve it. Well, once I hear that one thing, part of my privilege now kicks in because you're going to tell me something you think I can actually help you with. Right. And so now
Mhm.
how I use the privilege is to use that for good. And again, not overthinking it. If like I'm on the Make-A-Wish board of directors. And so I'll use that. So, these poor kids have gone through a lot. Right. So the
Mhm.
privilege that I have is, well, I have a healthy child. I don't know what it's like to have a child that's dealing with that type of illness. So that's one privilege I have. The other privilege I have is, well, I have a network. And so what can I do, right? Which is part of reason of being on the board. What can I do to help those particular children, some really special kids who are dealing with some really special issues? And I'm trying to help them have a really special day. Right. And so what can I do? How can I use my network? How can I use my influence? How can I use my professional background from a business perspective? What can I do with the privileges that I have to use it for good on behalf of somebody else? So that's an example of how we all have it. You just have to be less focused on yourself and more focused. And again, leadership, our job is to develop leaders. So our focus should never be on ourselves. It should be focused on our team. But what is it that the team needs, or what is it that each individual on my team needs that I can use my privilege to help them get?
Yes. Stephanie, this is so good. It's so much like putting things into perspective and also the examples and making it plain. Now I want to talk about, now that we know these things, how can we thrive in the workforce as leaders? So, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges that leaders face when they are managing diverse teams, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, the biggest one usually is the diverse team is just, if they're a really high performing diverse team, they're going to be a team that has uncomfortable conversations. They're going to be a team that challenges each other. They're going to be a team that holds each other accountable, that calls each other out, and may sometimes call you out, right? So that's the challenge. But man, oh man, if you know as a leader how to navigate that, it can be so incredibly powerful. So one of the ways that I have always found when managing diverse teams is I want everybody to feel comfortable enough and be able to feel seen and heard and psychologically safe. Right? I have to create that environment as a leader. If I want my workforce to thrive, I've got to create an environment that allows them to be able to win. Right. And so how I do that, and we've talked a little bit, Monique, about the acronym of ALLY, Ask, Listen,
Mhm.
Learn, You Take Action. Well, in the book, I also talk about another acronym, which, I started this saying one of the reasons I wrote it is I was tired of hearing people self-anoint themselves as an ally. You have to earn the title of being an ally. And earn is an acronym as well, Monique. And so that stands for you have to be able to establish an environment where everybody feels seen, appreciated, and psychologically safe. And I'll get back to that because that's going to be the answer to your question. But also the A means that you have to assure alignment. And why that's important is always remember that the average worker is just trying to get a couple of answers to some really basic questions. They just want to know, what is it that we as a business do? And what is it that what I do in this business contributes to what we do as a business? That's really all they're trying to figure out, right? And so we as leaders have to assure alignment. The left hand has to know what the right hand's doing in our business. And that's our job to, whether it's communicate it or expose our people to it, so that they understand that they're working for a much bigger purpose. Because once people realize they're working for a bigger purpose, that's going to help you with retaining top talent and attracting top talent. So you've got to assure alignment. The R is you have to rally the troops. If you get somebody who feels like they can be psychologically safe, which means they can speak their truth, good, bad, or indifferent, right? And they know what it is that we as a business do and what role they play in the significance of what we as a business do. Now you rally them all together towards a common cause. You've got a team that's unstoppable. Like literally unstoppable, because they know what they're doing, why they're doing it as well. And then the N, obviously I come from aviation, so N stands for you got to navigate the narrows. It's important that we as leaders know where we're going, when we're getting there, how we're getting there. Like we've got to navigate that whole thing. And then we have to make sure that we clearly communicate it so that the team understands it. We're on the right bus, going to the right place. We're all, seated in the right seat, right? So we have to navigate that. So when you think of some of the challenges when you're managing diverse teams and how we overcome it, is you really have to realize that the biggest thing I can do is to create a space that my team feels like whatever they say will be heard and they'll be acknowledged for saying it. And then we can have a good, healthy discussion about it. That's what establishing an environment where people feel seen, appreciated, and psychologically safe. That seems so simple, but a lot of times, well, listen, we're all in the workplace. Most workplaces struggle with this such basic concept because people feel like, well, I'm not going to say anything, right? Or they would love to say something, but nobody's invited them to actually give their opinion. Right. Leadership is just out there creating rules and regulations, and people who are closest to the situation are like in their mind thinking, well, that's not going to work because this, and this. But nobody's actually asked their opinion. And so they choose to not say anything. So nobody wins in those kind of scenarios. But that's why for me, being able to create, and this is what the leader's job is to do, create an environment where everybody feels like they have a voice in the conversation. And it doesn't mean you have to agree or implement everything people say. I mean, you're still the leader and you probably have a bigger perspective, right, that you're trying to manage. But it is important that at least you hear from people who are closest to the situation or who have a dog in the fight. You do hear their perspective. And then, of course, if you can implement those things that are going to be best for the organization, that would be great.
That would be great. And Stephanie, how do you gauge how well you're doing as a leader? And what are the signs that show that you're on the right path?
You should absolutely be, if you can, be taking assessments, right? Asking your team how you're doing as a leader is really important. Now, here's the deal. If you've set up a place where people feel, like they're psychologically safe, then when you ask them, they can actually tell you, right? If you've not set that up, then you put them in a weird predicament if you ask them, because they're not going to be able to speak their truth, because that's not what's allowed here, right? So you as the leader really have to work hard at creating that environment. But one of the things that you can do, and I used to do this when I was a leader, is if you're in an organization, a lot of times there's a 360 assessment, which basically means that you can give that to your employees, and then they anonymously can grade you as a leader as what they think you're doing well, not doing well, areas of improvement, et cetera. If you don't work for a company that has 360 assessments, then that shouldn't stop you as a leader from being able to have some one-on-one time with your folks to say, you know what, listen, my job is to develop leaders. And I really want to know what it is that you feel like I'm doing well that can help you further in your career. And where are some areas that you feel like I could stand to improve in? And then and give me examples, right? And so you could do that. Again, all of this is based on trust and the premise that you've created that environment where people feel like they're going to be heard and not hurt if they say something to you that you're not necessarily going to necessarily be aligned with, right? Or may not like to hear, if you will. So this is dangerous if you've not set up and established a trustworthy environment. If you haven't as a leader, that's job one, right? If you have, then job two is to always be checking in on your team to say like, hey, listen, what is it that I can do to help better serve you? And then listen to what they say, take notes. And here's the biggest thing, because I used to actually coach executives once upon a time, and I would coach them on this very thing. Mm-hmm. When they give you that information, it takes courage to tell a leader where they have area for improvement, right? That's a courageous move. When they tell you that, your job as a leader is the only response you're allowed to give. The only one is to say, thank you. That's it. What most leaders would do is go, well, the reason why I did it that way is because, right? And so now that shuts down everything. It shuts down literally everything. If you're asking them and they're telling you, your job is to sit, shut up, take the notes, listen, and at the end, the only thing you're allowed to do is say, thank you. That's it. Right. And so that's one aspect. The other thing that you can do as a leader, and you should have your own board of directors, if you will. And what I mean by that is a close inner circle that can show you and share with you your blind spots. So now let's go back to your question. If you ask one of your people, like, hey, what is it you think I could be doing better? They're going to be like, no, I think you're great. That's going to be their first response, right? Like, oh, no, I think everything's good, because they're almost afraid to say, like, you know, you kind of suck in these areas, this area, this area, this area. And so when they do that, your comeback isn't just to accept that, because you yourself know there's areas you could do better. Your comeback is going to do, you know what, I really appreciate that. But listen, if I wasn't that great, right? Tell me some things that you think so you're going to push back on it and circle back around again and ask the question again. Where are some areas that I'm really not that great? Because we all have areas that we could improve in. So you're going to push back on it. Once they tell you, you're going to listen, you're going to say thank you. Then what you're going to do after that is to say, I'm going to really work on this. I'm going to give this some thought, and I'm going to come up with a couple of things that I feel like I can do that will help lend itself to me getting better in this area. Would it be okay with you if I come back to you in a week or a couple of days, whatever, and share with you what I'm thinking? Would that be okay? And of course, they're going to be like, yeah, that would be great, because now they're part of your growth, right? And why that now? It takes a lot. I will tell you, again, you've got to be professionally mature to be able to do that. And when I coached executives, I would always say, this ain't for the faint of heart, right? But if in fact you can do that, two things happen. One, you really do get to grow in an area that somebody who's working on your team sees it as an opportunity for you. But two, equally as important, is they get to see that you're serious about this. And they get to see that, okay, this is an environment where we can all grow and thrive. Because if my leader's vulnerable enough to be able to ask me and then come back and show me some areas that they're thinking to try to implement and then get my thoughts and opinions, then what does that do for them? All right. Now you've created an environment where it's not just I'm growing as the leader. We're all growing, right? That's the point, is we're all growing. We're all going to win together, or we're all going to lose together.
So good. All growing growth. And that is good, because it's like there is some self-reflecting going on there. And then also it's scary. And for people who are listening, they're like, okay, we've learned so much today, and this tells me that there are some things I need to do. I got some things to work on. I don't know, Stephanie, if I'm ready to lead a diverse team. This might be too much. What would you say to those leaders who may feel like they're unprepared to lead diverse teams? They're comfortable with where they are.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, what I would say is because I don't know that it has as much to do with diverse teams as much as just growing. Right, as a person, and diverse teams may be one area that you're growing in. But if you're a leader who's afraid, who's comfortable, let's just put it that way. Yeah. If you're comfortable, nothing wrong with that, right? You can stay where you are and be completely comfortable. However, if you're a leader who's like, I want to go to that next level, or I'm a person who just doesn't like to hang out in the comfort zone, right? Then what I would tell you is you've got what it takes. which is the promising part, right? Like we've all got what it takes because I think I actually mentioned this in the book as well. When we think about, because as you know, I know you've read the book, I spend some time on the science side of this whole thing, right? And just the brain, the neuroscience behind it. And so we instinctively as human beings have what it takes to actually care about other human beings. And that's really what allied leadership is all about, right? Is this you not just being, oh, I'm the leader, I've got the title to do as I say, but you realize like I'm the leader and my job is actually to serve my people. And when I do that, then they in turn will serve the company and serve me, and we all win, right? So the goal here is, what do? You know, if you as a leader are just afraid of growing, then that's a different discussion. And diverse teams may be one of it. What I would tell you is this: it's okay if you're a person who's like, I actually am good. Like, I don't feel like growing right now, right? Because growing is painful and there's change that has to happen and all that stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. Like, not everybody needs to be a leader, right? Because leadership, there's only so many positions at leadership. We got leaders and we have doers, right? So you have to pick your role. What's your talent? What's your gift? And where should you be hanging out? And there is no shame in feeling like, I'm good. Like, I don't want the extra responsibility. I think people kind of crucify people when they're like, what do you mean you don't want to lead? What does that mean? I'm like, you don't want to lead, don't lead, right? But what I am saying is, let's do the reverse. If you're a person who would rather be comfortable, not grow, not hit those areas, and not ask for people to kind of dive into your life and show your blind spots, I don't want you to be in leadership, right? Because now you can be dangerous to people. Because part of leadership is developing other leaders. So what we don't need is developing leaders that don't know how to handle confrontation. We don't need leaders who develop and are afraid of uncomfortable conversations. We don't need leaders who don't know how to work with people who are not like them. Like, the world doesn't need any more of that. One could argue we have an abundance of that right now. Right. So where I'm focused in on is, okay, as the world is growing and we're, going to another level, what's everybody's gifts and talents? Why are you here on earth? If leadership is something you've been called to do, then your job is to do it to the best of your ability. And that means you're going to constantly be growing and uncomfortable. That's how you get to that next level, right? You never get to the next level being comfortable. I always say nothing beautiful grows on top of the mountain. All the beautiful flowers and lilies and everything are actually grown in the rubble and where the rocks are. And there's, trials and tribulation. That's where our real growth happens. If we think about the times that we've grown the most, it's when we were most uncomfortable, or we did something stupid and we're like, oh my God, that was like, I'll never forget that, right? All those kind of scenarios is where we get our true growth. And so if you're a person who would rather stay comfortable because the fear has gripped you and you'd rather not grow, there's nothing wrong with that, but just know then I would not classify you or even encourage you to be a leader. That's not the job. The job is, not only am I constantly growing and putting it out there and showing my vulnerabilities, but I have a responsibility to grow those people that God's given me influence over as well.
That's so powerful. I love it.
Thank you.
It may be for you with love. It's with love. And this might not be for you.
It may not be for you. Exactly. I think we have to have those kind of candid conversations. It's not for everybody. And, when people say to me that they want to become a leader, Monique, first question I always ask them is like, that's awesome. We have a leadership epidemic. And so I think if you, really dive into it and learn and grow, like, you could be just so instrumental on so many different levels. But the first question I want to know is, why do you want to become a leader?
Yeah.
Right? Beyond the title and the extra money, why do you want to actually lead? And once you get past that, once you understand that from a person's perspective, because the title and the money, listen, depending on the team and the leadership gig, it may not be enough money, right? Yeah. So what you want to do is to, leadership is hard and can be a lonely place. And so you really have to dig deep as to why do you want to be a leader? And it can't be because of the title of the money. Just work more overtime. You can get the money, right? And so, and titles, they come and go. So you really have to dig deep as to, are you called to be a leader? I personally think everybody is called to be a leader in some shape, form, or fashion, right? And so now the question becomes, are you willing to do the work to earn that title and to keep the title and to help people and not hurt them? And that's a big part of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Stephanie, this has been phenomenal. And I want to transition into continue talking about the work that you're doing and how can you continually support those people who are listening to the podcast. So if you could share a little bit more about how people can work with you and what are some of the things that you offer, I would love it.
Oh, sure. Of course. So first of all, I've had such a good time with you, Monique. So thank you for
Yeah.
inviting me on the podcast. This has been
Yeah.
so fun. How people can, work with me. There's one, because I primarily speak, and I primarily speak to just, big companies, right? So unless you work for a big company that's pulling me in, you probably really won't necessarily hear me speak, because I rarely speak at public conferences. Primarily, but this year I'm actually speaking at two. So I'll give you those conferences in just a second. It's rare. Usually I don't speak at public conferences. So I'm excited to be able to offer two things that the folks can come to or stream into if they care. But beyond that, you can go on my website, stephaniechung.com. That will tell you a lot of different things about me and what it is that I'm all about. Another thing that I'm so excited about, and I would highly encourage everybody to do this. I just started on Substack in earlier this month in January. Yeah. And I'm really excited about that. So they can find me it's called Your Ally in Leadership. And that is where I am on Substack. And let me tell you why I'm so excited about this. First of all, I do get a lot of people saying, "Hey, Steph, how can I work with you? Do you have coaching? And unfortunately, I don't have it in my schedule that I can do all that. But that's why I created the Substack, because it allows me to coach people. And, you can either do the freebie, which is once a month, you're going to get a newsletter from me and a monthly mindset of here's what I'm thinking. Here's kind of how I'm attacking different challenges and whatnot. Or there's a paid version, a small fee. But what that does is you hear from me every single week. And every single week, I'm coaching you and I'm talking to you. And really what we're talking about is the science behind leadership and success. That's really what we're talking about. And so the people that tend to want to be coached by me tend to be entrepreneurs, or so people who run their own business, or executives in a company that are going and moving up throughout their career. They're trying to figure out how to get to the C-suite, or women who are in male-dominated spaces, and maybe they're trying to understand how to have more of an executive presence. Or if you're a salesperson, you're a really good salesperson, but you want to be the number one salesperson. That's kind of my tribe, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so what I've done, and really where a lot of energy and effort and resources that me and my team have put into, so that I can give more people more trainings and more development and more access, is through my Substack. So I'm super proud of the work. I will tell you, it's probably some of my best work out there. And so I encourage everybody to sign up and follow me on Your Ally in Leadership. I promise you, you're going to learn some new things that you didn't know before, and you're going to be around like-minded people. So I'm really thrilled about that. And then the other thing is, of course, buy the book, right? I wrote the book. One thing that's probably important, Monique, is when I wrote the book, my speakers bureau was like, "Hey, Stephanie, people are asking you for a book. You should write a book." And I was like, I'm good, right? But I remember then, hearing a lot, having a lot of conversation about it. And I decided, well, if I'm going to write a book, Lord, I want this to be a book that you feel like is needed out there. Yeah. And so I went away for 5 days by myself. I had never done that before. I went completely off the grid. So I had no phone, no being on the internet, no nothing. I was like, it was just me and Jesus, Monique. Mm-hmm. But that is where the outline of the book came and was birthed from. And so I really do believe that this is a book for the season that we're in. And I am very excited. It's the number one international. It launched number one in US, Canada, and Australia in 9 different categories. And so I'm always enamored and just incredibly humbled that people, when they read the book, they're like, "Man, I've never thought of it from this perspective." And that's really what it's all about. How can I help leaders do this thing called leadership in a faster and more powerful way than what I, did. I made mistakes along the way. Some I still got where I needed to go, right? But I learned a lot of things along the way. And so I wanted to share that with people. And so I'm incredibly proud of the book. So you can read the book. You can follow me on Substack. You can go on my website. And then, of course, I'm on all the social media. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram. And all of those call signs are at the Stephanie Chung.
Definitely. We will definitely put all those things in the show notes so people can click right on them. And Stephanie, my final question is, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
Ooh, such a good question. So here's what I would say. Oh, you know what? I forgot to answer your other question too,
Okay.
Monique. Two places that I'm speaking at in public. One is I'm speaking at keynoting John Maxwell's conference, Day to Grow conference.
Wow.
Yeah, John
Okay.
Maxwell is like a beast in the leadership business, and
Mm-hmm.
I've admired his work for years. So that's March 19th, and it's in Orlando, and there will be leaders from around the world coming in on that conference. So I will be a keynote there. And then I'm also keynoting at Global Leadership Conference, which is it is actually the largest
Yeah.
leadership conference in the world. That's going to be in August 7th and 8th, and it's in Chicago. So that one, I think you can also live stream in. You may not necessarily have to be there in person. People from around the world stream into that one. So those are the two areas that I know the two publicly held conferences that I will be speaking at this year. Now, what does it mean to be Black in business for me? Oh man, first of all, I'm always, here's what I think about Black people in general. We are a unique bunch. And we do, John Hope Ryan always says, we do a lot with a little. And so we're always used to opposition. And this season that we're in is no different. And yet we always come out of it ahead, right? And so every obstacle that's formed against us does never prosper. It just doesn't prosper against us. Like we still push through and grind through and whatnot. And I think that is our superpower. And unfortunately, I wish we didn't have to fight and grind so hard, but it is what it is, right? So my whole focus on being Black in business is our superpower are the things that some people struggle with. We tend to be okay with uncomfortable conversations. We said what we said, right? And so where I believe that we have great strength is we're incredibly innovative, we're very creative, and we're not afraid to take risks. Right now, the groups of people that are out there creating businesses and starting businesses, as we know, are Black folks, right? And so that's really good. And then in business, and if you're not opening up your own business, but let's say you work in corporate America, or right now you've got one foot in both, there's competitive advantages that you have as well, because we tend to see things differently because of our life experiences. Nothing has ever been handed to us. And so therefore we just have it innately in us to know how to hustle and grind, but also how to be loving and caring and, considerate of others. So all the things I'm talking about, we instinctively tend to have these habits. We may need to know how to channel them, right? And so that's what the book is there to serve, to help with that as well. But being Black in business to me is such an honor. We're just such a creative group. We are the culture, right? Everybody else tries to follow the culture, but we set the culture. And that can be incredible when it comes to business. And so our ingenuity, our innovation, our directness, our love for each other and encouragement for each other, and just how we see the world. To me, it's like, it's an honor to be Black, right? And whether it's in business or not in business, I just love, love, love everything that we bring to the table, and nobody can touch us. We are truly unstoppable. Who else could have this type of history and story? In our family, we always say, yeah, we have a history. Obviously, we all go back to, the slavery days and the rough beginning of how we got here, but we're the descendants of the survivors. And so what we have is a responsibility to not just survive, but to thrive. That's the responsibility we have. And so I, like many others, are doing my part to make sure that I give of my gifts and my talents to really help people know how to thrive, regardless of what's going on around you. How do you thrive? And so that's where I think that it's our superpower. And, again, we have a lot of things accessible to us. What I would encourage your listeners to do is, now is the time more than ever to step up into what's all available out there for you. Figure out what you gravitate towards, what resonates with you, and then dive all the way in. Don't put one foot in, dive completely in, because this is your season. I believe this is going to be an amazing year, even with all the obstacles. I think all the obstacles is what make me think it's going to be even more amazing, because when things are thrown at us as a culture, we tend to thrive. And so now's not the time to kind of sit back and lick your wounds. Now's the time to be like, you know what? Okay, I know what's up. Now let me figure out all the different things that I need to invest in for my own growth, my own learning, my own development, so that I can make sure that I'm seizing the opportunities ahead of me.
So powerful, so powerful. Now is the time. Felt that.
Yes. It is your time to thrive in 2025. That's my slogan for the year.
I love it. I love it. Stephanie, thank you so much for bringing all of the knowledge, the value, and also the energy to the Black to Business podcast. And thank you so much for all the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monique. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Leading is not just about showing up. It's about stepping up. And today we had a real unfiltered conversation about what it means to do just that. We didn't just talk about leadership in the broad sense, which I really loved. We got into the real challenges of leading a diverse team, from handling uncomfortable conversations to building trust in environments where people may not automatically see you as the authority. And Stephanie broke down how bias shows up in leadership, why so many leaders claim to be allies but don't back it up with action. And we also got into the importance of self-awareness as a leader, because, let's be honest, leading diverse teams isn't always easy. And sometimes we have to check ourselves first. So whether it's managing generational gaps, different communication styles, or perspectives that challenge your own, leadership isn't about avoiding the hard stuff. It's about leaning into it and navigating it with confidence. So if you've ever questioned whether you're ready to truly lead, this is your sign that you are, because leadership isn't about knowing it all. It's about committing to learning, growing, and showing up for the people who are looking to you for guidance. We appreciate you so much for being a part of the Black to Business family. And to access the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit blacktobusiness.com/237. And there you can also learn more about Stephanie and the work that she's doing, as well as those conferences that she mentioned. And I can't wait to see you back here next week, same time, same place. But in the meantime, keep building boldly and keep pushing the culture forward. Later.